before we call Professor Charles, let me briefly introduce you to this father of ESD, I would say that. Okay, Dr. Charles holds the UNESCO Chair at York University in Toronto, Canada. He has been an advisor to several ministries of education in Asia and Europe, as well as universities and colleges in the Americas. He has numerous publications and has lectured worldwide on a range of topics from quality education to educating for global citizenship and educating for sustainable future. In the past, he was a teacher, principal, curriculum superintendent, and regional superintendent with the Toronto Board of Education before assuming the UNESCO chair in 1999. He has been awarded 7 honorary doctorates and professorships spanning Europe, Latin America, and Asia. He is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts in the UK, the Salzburg Global Seminar in Austria, and the Australian Association of Environmental Educators. I think it will take the whole night here if we are going to list down all Professor Charles' accolades. So we will leave it to other avenues. So without any further delay, I would like to invite our guest speaker today, none other than Professor Charles Hopkins, to deliver his talk entitled Educating for Global Citizenship, a global request with local implications. Please join me in welcoming Professor Charles Hopkins. Yes, it's all yours.
Thank you very much for those kind words. Let me get my my screen up. Am I sharing now? Can you see it?
Yes, yes.
Great. All right. Well, yeah, thank you for the nice introduction, Professor Harold, and thank you for inviting me, Professor Rohizani. It's a pleasure. I wish I was actually there. This is a cool December morning here in Toronto. It's well below freezing, so it would be my pleasure to be there in Penang. I was first in Penang, I believe, in 2006. And I've been back to Penang a couple of times, and so I know what how beautiful your campus really is. So, at any rate, let me begin. What I plan to do is to talk for roughly half an hour or so, and then we'll get into a discussion. I always love having discussions with experienced teachers because, you know, as we try to move from the big picture, the theory, and so on, into reality. And each of you have a different reality, not only by the grade level, but, you know, every year the class is different. Each class has its own character. It's ups and downs. Some years are better than others, right? But that's teaching. So the idea of that there are these big issues, big ideas, and so on that we need to address. Let me just share some of the ones. And no one country can live in isolation. We are all interwoven. Even the rural area of Malaysia is totally interdependent with the urban area, with Kuala Lumpur, you know. So there's this idea of humanity trying to work together in synergy. And this is especially so between nations. And so as we look at, these are some of the huge issues that are facing us at the moment. But as educators, I think we also have to think, how are we preparing our students for the future? And so the idea that, while we have these global challenges, for our students, they may be opportunities, because these are huge issues that are not going to go away easily. So they will form and shape the economy of the future. It's a different way of thinking about what we need to impress with our students is the idea that this isn't something terrible that we're handing down and okay, over to you. We throw the torch, flame first, and so on. But we also have to look at it as how are we going to address this? How can this actually be an opportunity? So, at the end of the Second World War, we decided that countries needed to have a space to talk with one another, to plan, to try and prevent a third world war, but also to shape the future and the development. And so out of that came the United Nations. And the United Nations, just in roughly the 1980s, saw that just trying to impose environmentalism, especially on the poor countries, was not going to work. We had extreme differences, just as we have now, between the wealthy and the poor. And so most of the world wanted development, whereas we had a number of the more wealthy countries who were very concerned about pollution, what we were doing to the oceans, what we were doing to the atmosphere, and they wanted environmental protection. And then we had the ones who were worried about preserving culture. And so the concept that was put together was called sustainable development, right? So how could we develop in such a way that we met the needs of the current generation without preventing future generations from also meeting their needs? So we have the UN definition of sustainable development being development that meets the needs of the current generation without preventing future generations from meeting theirs. I like the definition of an African indigenous elder. And the definition was enough for all, forever. Enough for all, forever. It's a beautiful definition for a teacher, because at any grade level, you can be talking with students about what is enough. What is enough? And what does for all mean? Does that mean for the indigenous elders tribe? Was it for all of South Africa? Was it for all Africans? Was it for all humans? Did it stop at humans? Being an indigenous person, you can realize that no, for all was beyond just humans, but all life, and forever had that intergenerational. So at any rate, as the UN came together and discussed how they could implement this concept of sustainable development, they approved the concept in 1987, but in 1992, for the first time, world leaders came together in Rio de Janeiro, and they agreed upon an implementation plan. It was called Agenda 21, and there were 40 big issues they agreed to work collaboratively together on. That went from 1992 until then they decided that with the new millennium in 2000, this would be a time to revisit and restart and come up with a 15-year plan. And so that was called the Millennium Development Goals. And in 2015, they agreed upon another set of goals, which we simply called the Sustainable Development Goals. And these are the 17 current goals. But as I say, these are big international goals. These are the issues that world leaders could agree upon. And so we have big ideas like addressing poverty, addressing health issues. You know, the pandemic is a current one, but we also have many other huge. Malaria is still, you know, a huge problem. So there are 17. The last goal is partnerships, because we realize that countries cannot do this alone. There's no way. This has to be done by bringing together private sector, public sector, non-government organizations, and in particular, higher education, education systems of all sorts. And as we form these partnerships to try and address it. The other big concept that we need to think of is that just working on one in isolation doesn't work. I like to think of it as a patchwork blanket. You know, being Canadian in winter, I'm thinking blankets, right? So if you think of the whole thing as the blanket, just one patch is not very helpful. But no one can work on them all. So the idea is, how do we collectively work on these? And so often we work on issues, because the issues mean, well, education plays a part, health plays a part, gender equity plays a part. And we take the expertise that is in each of these and we try to holistically bring them together. Now you can see number 4 is on quality education. And each of these has targets. So in Sustainable Development Goal 4, the first target is to move from the Millennium Development Goal target of everyone having an education to grade 6. Now where the target is expanded so that everybody gets free access to secondary school, and a quality is there. And so there's tremendous discussion. I think as teachers, you think of, what is a quality education? Does quality mean that everyone has access to a computer? Or does quality mean that in Africa, all schools will have toilets? Does it mean that everyone will pass certain standards that are set by the government in language, math, and science? You know, so there's all these discussions. But as well, there's access to early childhood education and care and so on. For point 5, it's education that often we refer to it as special education or something. Those students that are very, very hard to serve, those with disabilities, the indigenous, you know, around the world, we do a terrible job of being able to actually serve the indigenous students of the world. 4.7, though, is the one that is featured in our lecture today. That is the one where they are saying that we want everyone to have education for sustainable development and global citizenship. So if you look at the target of 4.7, it's by 2030, ensure all learners acquire knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including and through education for sustainable development, where we look at sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, promotion of culture of peace and nonviolence, and global citizenship, appreciation of cultural diversity, and so on. So that is the big, lofty goal that we're working on. But what we want to do is how do we do that, bringing it down to your particular school and within your classroom. So let me say a word about, and as I say, we'll come back and talk about this, but let me say a word about the concept of what is education for sustainable development. Basically, there are four ways that access and aspects of ESD. And the first one is access and retention in quality education as defined by your own country. We won't have any development unless we have knowledgeable, well-educated people, as citizens. But the problem has been that it's our most educated countries that are often creating the greatest threats to a sustainable future. They are the ones with the greatest ecological footprints, etc. So the idea isn't just more of the traditional Western education. The idea is reorienting the very purpose of education, because from the Second World War on, the purpose of education was development. It wasn't sustainable development. It was development. And so how do we reorient the very purpose, what we teach, the context of what we teach, the values, the ethics, the underlying worldview is what we need to challenge, rethink, repurpose our education system towards sustainable development. This is a huge task. The third is to ensure that public understand, because the general public, they have their vision and their ideas of what schools should be like. As teachers, we do not really have full control over the education system. We deliver what the Ministry of Education says, right? They set the curriculum, which is a wise thing, but still, teachers have a great deal of say into how they deliver, the pedagogy, and what even the exams and so on, right? But we must ensure that the general public are on board so that they understand it. And then fourthly, training for all sectors. So the United Nations talks about it not as a separate subject. I mean, some have taken on the idea of sustainability education and tried to make that a composite of environmental education and maybe something around gender, right? We do have to embed it in all of our subjects. We really talk about it being education for sustainable development. So if you think of it as sustainability education, then it's just like environmental education, peace education, driver education, anti-drug education. I have a list of 100 of these. That when I was superintendent of curriculum, every 2 weeks, a group would come in with a binder and say, just put this in the curriculum. And of course, all my teachers say, go away. With such a crowded curriculum, it was impossible. So what we need to do is to think about this as reorienting our existing disciplines, and how do we embed this ethos or this culture within it. So it's about, as you can see, to look at environmental integrity, economic viability, just societies, these ideas, learning to live sustainably. Yes, without an environment, there will be no society and certainly no economy, right? So at the base, there is that, but it is not limited to turn off the light campaigns or recycling. This is just elementary that does need to be there. When we look at global citizenship, then we think of these things: a respect for all, not just all other people. Yes, belonging to a common humanity, and so on. But it is more about relationships between with people. It's about learning to live together. And we're moving beyond even just living together, but living together with others. You know, who are the others? And it may not, again, just be limited to other cultures. As you know, we're just beginning to see the forced migrations brought on around the world, but brought on by climate change, brought on by economic poverty, civil unrest, governments being overthrown, racism. We're just beginning to see that. And how are we going to prepare for that as teachers? How do we prepare a next generation of tolerance, of actually making the most? Because often it is the new immigrants who are extremely creative. They are the ones who had the ability and the fortitude to get up and move and get to another place. These are often the most creative people. We understand that here in Canada, where we are a nation that is made up of refugees and culture. In the city of Toronto, we are over 55% of our population of a little over 4 million were not born in Canada. The majority of people in this city were born outside. So this concept of global citizenship. So the two, ESD and global citizenship, work in synergy. One with education for sustainable development, sort of focusing more on knowledge and skills, dealing with the environment, but also dealing with economic understanding, and also the social justice and so on, whereas global citizenship is more a willingness and a worldview and a want to come. So you have the commonalities that are there of the same vision of a sustainable future. The same sort of pedagogy, a pedagogy of place and so on. Now, on top of these, when we start looking at people, you mentioned your former vice chancellor, Zul Razak. He is very, very strong on the values, the ethics that must underpin. So both ESD and global citizenship. So we have those kinds of aspects. The if I were to come up with a framework for it, I think that it's a very, very simple aspect is thinking about both ESD and global citizenship as learning about the world, how all the different aspects of seeing beyond, learning in, because we know as teachers, if we deal with an issue in situation, learning in the field, we used to call it outdoor education, and perhaps even still do. But wherever we can, learning in reality, learning in real settings, in the community, in the village, in the in the forest. The idea of learning for, and when we have it clear about global citizenship in our mind, how do we take that idea of partnerships and bring it into our classroom of students working with one another? So we need to put this in terms that we know and understand in scale, in scope. And what do we learn from our encounters with the environment? What are the big issues that we take away? And bringing this, as I say, on a scale, from the classroom to the schoolyard to the community, thinking of Malaysia as a whole, Southeast Asia, globally, so that they will pick up these kinds of skills that will help them to address those huge issues in the future, those huge issues that I opened with that are not going away. How can they bring meaningfulness to their life? One of the most important things to anyone in their own well-being is a sense of purpose, a sense of meaningfulness, a sense of giving that needs to be there. So we can come back and talk about this, but learning about the world not only from an ecological point of view, but learning about the world from a political point of view, with all those flags and so on that are there. But really, although we have all these nations and flags, we share this planet. We share it. If you were to take the third issue of the planet, it comes from, it's showing in reality the amount of water that is on the earth. This is the total amount of water. It would form a bubble. That's the water from the oceans, the water from all the rivers and lakes and so on in the world. It would form a bubble about 1,300 kilometers in diameter. And that's in scale. That's what we share. And the air, if we were to wrap the planet and do it to scale, you would find that the air that we breathe and so on is like if we were to wrap the earth in saran wrap, and the saran wrap would be the air. We have to somehow get in scale and perspective of the issues what we're doing. But also, I think it's important for us to be rooted in who we are in our own cultures. I was in India and I went to Gandhi's Ashram in Ahmedabad. And there in a plaque on the side of his wall, Gandhi was so tolerant. You know, Mahatma Gandhi was so very, very tolerant of others. But he said, I do not want my house to be walled in on all sides and my windows to be stuffed. I want the cultures of all lands to be blown about my house as freely as possible. But I refuse to be blown off my feet by any. You know, so it's the idea of tolerance, of understanding, of wanting to grow and to learn more about others and respect their particular worldviews, but at the same time be sort of concerned with their own. Or me. So what does this mean for us as teachers? What do we need to change and so on? And I suggest that just as we need not to be blown off our feet, let's take stock. What I firmly believe is that we hold on to the various stages that of learning, just as we have in the past, but we can make some modifications as we embed. So the idea of beginning the world's education systems with instilling a joy of learning. right? That schools are happy places. They're places that you want to come to. And the next stage of exploring, what is there out there to learn? So they open up the vision in those early stages of not only the joy of learning, but the excitement of what is there, and then giving them the skills of how to manipulate and learn all that is out there, and then coming back, finding what they are really focused on, and how to learn with purpose, to bring meaning to their life. And from there, shifting into the most important thing that I think we can give, and that's somehow shifting the responsibility of learning to the learner. We are still, in North America, we are still so wrapped up in almost entertaining the student, in babying the student. And, you know, if the parents, if the student is not doing well, then it's the fault of the teacher. The teacher didn't dance fast enough, or, you know, didn't have the right toys in the classroom and so on. Because the biggest thing we can do for the student is to have them take on a responsibility for their own learning, because learning is going to go on through their entire life. The world is changing. If there's anything we know, the world is changing so rapidly, and the rate of change will continue even greater. So the responsibility needs to be there. Now, one of the things that I wanted to also continue on with is learning in keeping, I think, with our same education theories. I don't know what your major theory is there in Malaysia, but you probably have heard of Bloom and talked about the different stages that Bloom has, how we move from just sort of transferring concrete facts, knowledge, and so on, until finally you get to creativity, the synthesis, the engagement, and so on. And so what in talking about sustainability and global citizenship, I've put together this idea where I think of the wicked issues being these sustainability issues that are out there, addressing climate change, mass forced migration, issues such as this. And so if we put together a chart where the vertical axis is whether or not we can measure something precisely, you know, is this a 72 or a 74? So measurability, and then across the horizontal axis, the certainty aspect. And then from low to high, if we take Bloom's first category of transferring the knowing down in that left-hand corner, that's where most schools stay. That's where we don't move on from there until everyone knows how to divide by four numbers, right? There are these states, and we can mark that. Water always boils depending upon the atmosphere and so on at a certain temperature, right? So we can mark that right, wrong, etc. But what we need to do is to move further out, because these wicked issues, we can't really measure them, and they are very, very uncertain. This morning we learned that in Europe, in particular in Britain, COVID-19 is changing, and there is a new strain of COVID-19. Right? It's the same as you know, as these 15 years ago. Was climate change real? Was it not? Now we know that it's real, but what is uncertain is how do we address it? How do we get those people who have put all the carbon dioxide, or at least put 90% of the carbon dioxide up in the air? How do we get those people to take it out and give the rest of the people who are living in poverty a chance for their own development? Right? So those are the uncertainties. But that sphere of the analyzing, creating, engaging, if we can spend time with our students where we really don't know the answer, and we allow them, their minds to soar and to think, that is where I think we need to be. Now, education, the good news is that with COVID, people are uncertain, and we're going online, coming offline. I'm back online now for the third time in Toronto. And it looks like in January, things are still getting worse. We'll go offline again. And so there's great uncertainty. And the change that is there from the traditional focus of individual competence of the student to looking more towards the common good as well. It's not just about the individual student, but it is how do we create a feeling of common good within our classrooms. The quality is not just math, language, and science, but quality as it is measured by PISA, but it also includes values, ethics, meaningfulness, these other things, from simply training them for a vocation to addressing their overall lifelong well-being, their mental well-being, and who are you as a person, etc. And from gender alone to in sexual orientation, all of the things, the attributes that a person is born with, from STEM to STREAM, adding the arts, artificial intelligence, and from common sense of reflection, the idea of not just knowing, but what is it that we don't know, and appreciating those things. We're looking at, and I would strongly suggest that as teachers, there's ways that you in your classroom can become involved in the reorientation of education. UNESCO itself is leading a huge initiative on the futures of education. It is time, with all the change in the world, to reassess the purpose of education. How do we deliver the pedagogy and so on? And I would strongly suggest that you look this up on the internet. Go to UNESCO and their initiative called the Futures of Education. And there are ways for your students to write in and make suggestions. They are collecting ideas from all around the world in their rethinking of education. So just a word also underway. UNESCO is now launching from a 10-year program from 2020 to 2030 called the Esd Roadmap. That was launched just in Asia, I think, about 10 days ago. Yeah, and you know how to find it. The whole program is there online, and I'm sure you will be able to track it down. But there are 5 priority areas: advancing policy, transforming schools and learning environments, and the third one is building the capacity of educators. And I would really hope that you would take the lead in your own school and share what you are doing with your master's degrees and so on, sharing it with not only the other teachers, but your administrators, with the parents in your community and so on. Take on that sort of leadership role that comes with a master's degree. And this document is up on the internet, and it addresses both ESD and global citizenship, because I say the synergy works closely together. So if we look in closing, or if we look at how this sort of can unfold in the schools, we see, unfortunately, most of the schools around the world have ignored this and are still focusing on trying to enhance their math and language. Math and language are extremely important tools. They're tools that we should make as sharp and know how to use these tools, but they're not the purpose of education. I firmly believe that we have to look at them. They are not the end of the education process. They are simply tools that everyone needs. But at any rate, as we go through the progression, some schools will have events and clubs. They'll have, a vegetarian Thursday, or they will have a certain religious club at the school, or the students with every year they have students dress up in their national costume and come, and so I mean these are starts, but they are not. They're steps along the way. You will have a club, the Environment Club, that goes out once a year and plants a tree. Those kinds of things. They're symbolic. Then you have about teaching about sustainable development in the disciplines. But what we're talking about is not just teaching about it, but where the students actually become engaged, right, with the purpose of education as a more sustainable future. And then finally, where you embed it right in the community. And fortunately, Penang and your university are the leaders in the regional center of expertise in ESD that, is recognized by the United Nations University. So that's sort of the ultimate, where the university and the school system and so on all work together to build a much more sustainable community. So wrapping up, I think the idea of moving forward is to build on your strength. Right? Build on your strength, realizing that no one discipline, it's not biology, it's not language, it's not visual arts that owns this whole thing. But every discipline can contribute. But there should be a focal point, or someone stands up. It could be you with your master's degree, who steps forward, working with the leadership, but tries to organize things and carries the sort of the load for a while within your school. But at some point, if we are really going to make it senior administration, whether it's the dean and the faculty, the vice chancellor, the principal in the school, the regional superintendent of schools, the mayor, these people have to come together and start resourcing things. And at least you have the RCE framework to bring these people together and talk about how is each person going to shoulder their responsibility and move forward. And then we need engagement and we need some research. What has been happening of youth becoming engaged, taking to the streets, marching? And the research is now just coming out. About 10 days ago, we saw research from Germany that showed that the more students knew about it did not necessarily mean that they took more action. No, but when they did start to find ways of taking action, it's called Fridays for Future, the Greta syndrome. Once the students became engaged, then their interest really went up. Like we all know we shouldn't smoke. We all know that what diet we should have. You know, so information and knowledge itself is not enough. We need engagement. We need to bring this to life. We need to bring it together in manageable chunks that are age appropriate. We can't put fear into the hearts of young children. We need to be looking at it through a lens of hope and working and actually doing things. So the research and the engagement, I think, are what is so important. And let me close with this story. I think you all know the ecological footprint. And so this is now about 10 years ago. In India, they were teaching to this little class in grade 4 of the ecological footprint. And this one little girl said, "But I have hands. I can do something about my footprint." And the teacher had the wisdom to see the imagery of the ecological handprint as the antidote to the ecological footprint. She had the kids draw their hands, but she didn't leave it there. She went to an NGO, a large NGO in India, with the concept of starting the ecological handprint. The NGO went to the Ministry of Environment in India, who saw the power in the idea. And it is spread through many, many parts of the world now over these last 10 years. It all came about from the imagery, the imagination of a little girl in grade 4, just as the ecological footprint came from a PhD, a professor of economics in University of British Columbia, working with his graduates as a student, right? So you have that coming from the upper end of the university world, but here you have a little girl in grade 4. But it wouldn't have gone anywhere without the teacher. The teacher being so important in nurturing, bringing it together, and carrying it forward in partnerships with the NGO, the community, the ministry, and so on. So I leave that with you, and I thank you very, very much for giving me your time on a Saturday night to be with us. You'll get the whole PowerPoint, but this is some references that you may find useful in the end. And thank you all so very, very much. And I'll stay on for a little bit if there are some questions that you would like.